Rick Coleman purchased an old farmhouse just a few miles outside of Clarktown. Rick and his two sons, a 15-year-old Jeff and 20-year-old Bobby, decided to pack up and leave the crowded city of Minneapolis behind and look for someplace calm to settle down. Rick sold his two mini-marts that he had been running since 1998 and rented out his home in the cul-de-sac for a chance to live on the farm. This is his story about how it came to be and what came next. 54-year-old Alan Hudson inherited his father's farm and immediately put it up for sale. He still lived on the property in the back. I came across the ad online and noticed he was only asking $85,000. Not much, really, for the expanse of the land. I couldn't just pass the offer up after seeing that, so I contacted the man and we delved into finalizing the fine points of the deal. 45 days later, we had closed in on the deal and the property was officially mine. Alan immediately moved out after my kids and I got settled into our new place. I had picked up not only a good piece of land, but a great investment that would generate me income every month. An investment of a lifetime was what it was, and I could not be happier about it. We had pigs and chickens, some horses as well. All this with a full crop field that was managed and maintained by a crew of farmers that worked in the land during the mornings and sometimes the late afternoon hours. There were also some cattle providing us with all our dairy needs too. So all in all, it was a whole blessing for us purchasing that farm and moving there. Alan agreed to see over all the management of the workers and see over the maintenance of the land for as long as we needed him to. I figured 100 acres of land was a lot to see over, but after only a few weeks on the property, things turned out not to be too bad. I loved it there and so did my kids. They had taken to living in the nature and away from the hustle and bustle of the city with an excitement that I was honestly not expecting from them. Considering that they had always been subjected to a fast and busy life, I thought this abrupt change might disturb them some. But they proved all those doubts and fears of mine to be false. We had adapted to our new life and were fully enjoying it when things took a sudden, wild turn. It was a weekend and Alan was over to do a routine check-in of the farm. He had been busy looking all over the farm the whole day. When he was to go back in the evening, however, his truck broke down. It was already about nightfall, so we invited him to stay over for the night. He refused our offer initially, saying that he couldn't stay after dark and had to get back. But even after we spent an hour working on the truck, it didn't show any signs of coming back to life. So he had to hesitantly take up our offer of staying the night. He seemed very reluctant to do so, though. He was very jumpy and almost scared for some reason, like he was expecting something bad to go down any minute now. It was puzzling to me, to say the least, but I didn't press much into it. Instead, I offered him some of my fancy rum, which calmed him down quite a bit. After a few shots, I noticed that the drink slowed him down very fast. He was a lightweight, apparently. After he was considerably buzzed with alcohol, that's when things started to get weird. Creepy, in other words. He told me why he sold the property to me at such a low cost, and how he never lived on the farm since he was 27. His grandfather was hung in the barn. He was hung for hiding a group of outlaws that murdered 8 civilians and robbed 2 banks back in Colorado. The 4 men that was hiding in the barn were never captured, but the marshals made an example out of him. Alan had a faraway look in his eyes when he recounted the happenings in detail.
My father watched them beat his father almost to death. They slowly tortured him, trying to find out what he was hiding them. But even after so much pain and torture, he did not give them away. And the marshals did not take kindly to that. After hours of beating him, they grew tired of his silence and decided to make an example out of him, so that no one in the future would dare do the same. One of the marshals spotted my father, who was 7 at the time, hiding in fear between some bales of haystack. Even that did not change their mind on hanging my grandfather. did not deter them from the cruel they were about to unleash. The marshal quickly grabbed my father and pulled him out of there. They made him watch everything go down. They hung my grandfather in the barn and stood there, watching him struggle and scramble for purchase as the life slowly drained out of him. They made my father watch my grandfather take his last breath. After they were sure that my grandfather was dead, only then did they leave. On the way back, they set the farmhouse on fire, along with our field and crops. The next morning, the 4 outlaws came back to our farm to thank my grandfather for his help just before they were to escape into Mexico. They were not expecting to see what they saw upon coming there. They were the ones who cut my grandfather down and gave him a proper burial over here, which is the back house now. For that, my father was always thankful to them.
We listened to all of the story with bated breaths, enraptured, never interrupting him. I felt really sorry for all of them. The trauma that plagued not 1 but 3 generations was really sad. But his next words were the ones that gave us all pause.
You know, my father was later told by my grandfather's friends and even some relatives that my grandfather had hidden 4 large sacks of gold somewhere around the barn, but no one knew exactly where. We tried searching for it many a times over the years, but then no one ever found anything.
It was an abrupt change in the conversation, but not an unwelcomed one. We were sitting there absorbing the sudden information when he dropped another piece of information on us.
My father always said that my grandfather was still around here somewhere, protecting the place as a spirit or something. And I think he was right. That's why I sold this place as soon as I inherited it. Some nights you can still hear a man being beaten and hung in the barn, crying and howling in pain.
And then the alcohol completely took over him as his head stumped to a side, leaving him unconscious, and leaving us all staring at him in the wake of this new discovery, wide-eyed and shocked. We were left to mull over the words for the rest of the night. The next morning came and he had no recollection of what had happened the previous night. He did not recall telling us anything. When pressed about the truth of his words, he got a bit anxious and just laughed it up. He told us not to pay any heed to his words and forget about it all, and he went on his merry way. That did not prove to be an effective solution. We failed to follow through the suggestion. Alan had left the place, but his words stayed with us. We wanted to believe what he was saying, but at the same time, we still didn't. On one hand, trusting in his words meant there was a hidden treasure somewhere on our property, but at the same time, it also meant that there was a ghost haunting that very same property. Not a very ideal living situation, that one. So I spent most of the next few days negating the information Alan had left us. My sons, however, were the polar opposites. They had taken the information like it was a written fact somewhere and not mere speculation. They really wanted to find the hidden wealth and had actively started the search, especially Jeff. He had taken it as if it was his time to shine as the protagonist in his own version of Treasure Island, or it seemed like it, seeing his determination in ransacking the whole place. He was leaving no stone unturned in his pursuit. Bobby's case was similar and different at the same time. He was a bit apprehensive of the situation and sometimes wondered aloud if the gold sacks were hidden somewhere on the farm, they would have been long found by the time we bought the property. To that, Jeff would always counter that just means the treasure's very well hidden. We would just have to search harder. All good points, mind you, but I was leaning more towards all of this being a ruse. Maybe word of mouth spread it out of proportion. It had been well over half a century, almost a century even, since all of that had happened. a little upside of 80 years to be exact. But it was giving the boys something to keep busy with, so I didn't say much on the matter. And we did come across some interesting places during the boys' thorough search of the perimeters that we might not have found so soon otherwise. Some hidden nooks and crannies here and there, scattered all over the property. The most exciting of those discoveries was a hidden room underground. A whole bloody basement that might have been closed shut since the day the old man passed. Its condition certainly said so. It was an utter mess. Jeff had been the one to find it, the trapdoor in the floors. It was like an entryway to hell itself. It was that bleak. It was in so bad of a state that it made Jeff's excitement on finding something secret lessen considerably. The air was so bad it must have been almost toxic at that point. So we had to let the place stay open to air out for a while before we could move down there. It was almost evening too, so we decided to leave it alone for the rest of the night and look into it the next day, despite the protests of Jeff. But that all soon left our minds, because that was the night things started getting really weird and very, very creepy in our house. For the very first time, but certainly not the last time, it was just the beginning. It started slow, with wind picking up the pace, and later accompanied with lightning flashes and thunder roiling. That certainly got my attention. Most of our animals would get in the barn by the evening by themselves, but sometimes a few stragglers would linger outside of it for a bit longer, especially a couple of our horses. So we had made it a routine that one of the boys, or sometimes I myself, would go outside before the nightfall and get all of them inside before closing the door. So it immediately made me concerned about the safety of those animals in case a storm decided to pay us a visit. I rushed towards the door to get it, asking the boys to come along and provide some helping hands. But as soon as I stepped out of the house, the outside view left me in a state of confusion. I stumbled on my steps and came to an abrupt halt. The boys met the same fate, even running into me in their haste. But I paid it no mind, because I was focused more on something else at that moment. I was baffled to see that the weather outside was as dandy as it had been earlier in the day. There were no signs of the thunderstorm anywhere. The weather was crystal clear, and the air was stock still. Not even some rustling leaves could be spotted. There was simply no disturbance in the outside world. It was about as calm as it could get. I turned around to look at the boys and see how they were faring, if they were seeing the same thing that I was. And yes, they were. They looked as stumped as I felt, wide-eyed with brows furrowed in confusion. I hurried back into the house just to see everything was calm inside too, as if no gust of wind had passed through there just moments ago. It left us standing there, smack dab in the middle of the room, bewildered beyond belief, left scratching our heads in a daze. "What the fuck just happened?" came the bemused voice of Bobby. "Beats me," was my honest answer to the query. Did all of that just happen? Or was that just my imagination? It couldn't have been my imagination. 3 people can't just imagine the same thing at the same bloody time. So it must have been real. It must have been a quick stop of the thunderstorm before it passed over to wreak havoc somewhere else, I reasoned. As quick as it took us to get to the door? Was that even possible? It must be possible, because it just happened. To us. The next few days proved to be very busy and happening, and very, very weird. We went through the basement very thoroughly. Most of the stuff there had succumbed to the passage of time, but still some remained intact, one of which was a chest that had some drawings in it. One of those told about another secret room under the barn. The entry of that room was hidden outside of the barn somewhere. That's why no one had ever found anything in the barn. It took us some time to locate because the place had changed so much over time, but once we found the entrance to the tunnel, finding the gold sacks was even easier. There were 4 sacks filled with gold in a small 4x4 cabin underground. We were on the moon on finding the treasure, but soon it all came to a stumbling halt when we covered everything up once again after taking the gold and came back to the house. Alan was waiting for us inside. Thankfully, we had put the sacks in another bag to carry them out, but our appearance and excitement gave us away anyway. We tried to hide what we had been doing, but I could tell Alan did not buy our excuses. He did not mention anything though, so maybe not. He was there for a routine visit and soon left the farm. We released a sigh of relief and got back to the gold, discussing where to hide it and what to do with it. We spent the whole night doing that, happy beyond belief. The next day, after the workers and farmers had left, I walked into the barn to check on the haystacks and see how long they were gonna last, when something hit me over the head. I hissed in pain and shock, stumbling on my steps as my hands quickly went to my head that was now bleeding. I slowly turned around to see what the hell was going on.
You think you're gonna take my gold without me knowing?
It was Alan, and he looked absolutely deranged. He had a shovel in his hands that he had used to hit me. He came for me once again, swinging the shovel towards me. This time I was prepared, so I ducked his strike. By then, my surprise had given way to anger too.
What the fuck are you doing, man? Get away from me, you fucking bastard! You think you can come here and just take what's supposed to be mine? We have been looking for those bags for generations. No way in hell I'm gonna let you have them.
Then started a fight, verbal as well as physical. I had grabbed a nearby horsewhip that was really long and sturdy, and that was my weapon of choice now. We were both making quite a ruckus in there. The voices must have reached outside. The boys must have heard us in there. Jeff soon came running in. He stood there for a moment trying to make sense of the scene, but quickly came to his senses and attacked Alan. He was trying to pry Alan away from me and hitting him when suddenly, the temperature of the room dropped considerably, leaving us shivering but still not giving up. And then, just as suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared in the room. It snatched Jeff up from behind and proceeded to hang him up in the air, making him scream in fear and kick around in the air trying to get down. There was too much screaming going on at that point by all of us, Jeff, Alan, and myself. And now it was joined with the ghostly howls and screams too. And the fog created by the sudden cold temperature was making everything much more eerie. Bobby walked in on this and then promptly ran back outside the barn. Everything in the room started floating suddenly, including us. That was when Alan let me go, seeing our surroundings change so drastically. Everything started twirling around, creating a whirlpool of sorts within the barn. The wood boards and other sharp pointy things proved to be a real danger then, abruptly hitting everyone and everything. Just as it was getting worse and worse, Bobby came running back in with the bag in his hands yelling, "I have your gold right here! Let them go!" Everything stopped abruptly at that as the ghostly figure turned towards the door. That's when I noticed that the whirlwind had made the horsewhip stick to the roof with the rope hanging down. I took that moment to take the rope and tie it around Alan's neck. Everything fell to the ground, but not Alan. The ghostly figure turned back around on hearing his sudden screams and saw Alan hanging from the top of the barn. The ghost tried to get to him, but it was too late. We could hear the ghostly man yelling and screaming as Alan took his last breath, right where he once had. The ghost disappeared as soon as Alan died, leaving a painful howl behind, and then the farm fell deathly silent once again, as if nothing had ever happened there.